Hello everyone, it's Old Guardian here. If you return to Hearthstone after 90 days of not logging in, or if you're a new player who completes the apprenticeship, you get a free deck. At the start of this free deck experience, you're going to get 6 decks that are loner decks, and these are the current options. There's Druid, Hunter, Mage, Rogue, Warlock and Warrior. You don't get a deck from all classes, you get these 6. And then after 1 week, you choose one, and when you choose one, it is added to your collection, and you will get to keep all of those cards. And now that we have had a couple of balance patches in March of the Lich King, these old decks, these are previous expansion decks, they always updated at the end of an expansion to include cards from that previous expansion, so these are Castle Natria decks basically, and they are now stronger than they were at the start of March of the Lich King, and many of these decks are actually really good at the moment. So it's a great time to return to Hearthstone, or a great time to start, because you're going to be able to play for 1 week with some really good decks, and then you get to keep one of them. The exact rules for getting a free deck. If you're a new player, you complete the apprenticeship and reach bronze 10, or you can also skip apprenticeship in the options, and then you will automatically start at bronze 10, but then you will miss out on some other rewards that you would get during the apprenticeship. Or if you log into the game after 90 days of not having logged in. These rules have changed a few times over the years. First it was once per account, then it was 120 days, but during Castle Natria, Blizzard changed this rule to be 90 days of logging in, and the decks are nowadays also available multiple times. The decks, at the start they are loner decks, the cards are not in your collection, they are on a separate page when you go to play, and you will be able to play with those decks, but you won't be able to use those cards in your collection. And then after 1 week you choose one, and then the cards are added to your collection. But let's take a more in-depth look at the decks themselves to help you decide which one to choose eventually. First of all, we have the Druid deck. The Druid deck is a Ramp Druid deck, and Ramp Druid, well, you get more mana, and you get more and more mana, and then you can do some broken things. It just never goes out of fashion. It's not particularly strong at the moment in the game, but I mean, Ramp Druid can always just win some games out of nowhere. This specific Ramp Druid list is kind of okay. It's not the best, but it's not the worst either. And now that the rotation is approaching in April, it's also time to start thinking, okay, well, what about cards after the rotation? And Ramp Druid offers some cards, because Topier the Shrubagazer is a card that is going to stay after the rotation, but cards like Wildheart Guff and Raid Boss Onyxia are going to rotate, so Ramp Druid is probably actually the weakest choice at the moment. Then we have Hunter. Hunter is a Beast Hunter deck, and Beast Hunter is a pretty good deck overall right now. It's a little bit hard to upgrade this though, because the full Beast Hunter compared to this list requires 4 more legendary cards. And if you happen to have those 4 legendary cards, yeah, then you're going to have a really solid deck, but the path to upgrading this can be a little awkward. This one does include Hydralodon, which is a Colossal minion which is going to stay in standard format after the rotation, but cards like Beastalker Tavish and Wing Commander Ihman are going to rotate out of standard. So overall, Beast Hunter is still a fine choice, but some of the other ones are doing even better right now. Beast Hunter was probably the best choice early in March of the Lich King, but nerfs have changed the meta a little bit and made some of the other decks even stronger. Like this one. It's big Spell Mage, and this list is a pure meta list right now. You can take this to the ladder, you can play this all the way to High Legend. It's totally fine. You can just play this deck and it rocks. The downside of this deck is that this deck includes cards like Magister Dawngrasp, Paladin Stoneheart, Mortar's Fire. A lot of these cards are going to rotate out of standard format in April, so you won't be able to use much of these tools after April, but right now this is actually probably the strongest deck to just take on the ladder and play. There's also a Rogue deck, which is a Thief Rogue deck, and now that all the other Rogue archetypes, Death Rattle Rogue, Miracle Rogue, were nerfed, Thief Rogue is the main Rogue archetype that is being played. However, this specific list is not super strong. It's missing especially Shadow of Demise, and there are a couple of other cards that could also be changed. So overall, this is like a mediocre choice. You can play with this. It's maybe not quite Legend capable as it is. Maybe you could somehow get to Legend, but but it would be pretty hard without some upgrades. On the other hand, you do get some cards that stay after the rotation, because Krakatoa is a Colossal going to stay after the rotation, Queen Azara, another splendid card going to stay after the rotation, Scabs is going to rotate out, so you don't get to keep all of this stuff, but some of these will be available in Standard also after April. But performance-wise, this one needs some upgrades. Whereas this one doesn't. It's Imp Warlock, and it's perfect legend capable, right out of the box. As a downside, well, Imp Warlock was a Castle Natria archetype that has not received any other support, so you're tied to this one expansion package of cards. As an upside, Castle Natria is not going to rotate out of Standard, Dreadless Tamsin is going to rotate out in April, but Imp King Rafam is going to stay, Sylvanas the Accused is going to stay, so despite being very low dust cost overall, very low value overall, this is going to give you some cards that are going to stay in Standard format for a while, and it might be a little bit independent also, because it's basically based around that one expansion, which also means that you probably don't have a lot of other uses for the card, so many ups and downs when it comes to this deck, but right now you could play this all the way to Legend. The Warrior deck is an Enrage Warrior. Enrage Warrior is pretty much the only somewhat playable Warrior archetype at the moment. Not super strong, but actually this specific list has been played all the way to Legend this season after the nerfs, and yeah, it's doable. It's still something that I would hesitate to pick. The overall dust value is pretty low. Then it has stuff like Rokara the Valorous, which is going to rotate out of Standard format in April. So is Rokara, so you're only going to be left with Decimator Olgra. It doesn't offer you much long-term value, but it's still a viable option, and definitely something that you want to be playing with during that 1 week when you have the loner decks, just to get the feel on what this deck feels to play with. So overall, these new and returning player decks, they don't offer any cards from the latest expansion, no cards from March of the Lich King, and that's the way it always goes with this. At the end of Castle Natria, they're updated with Castle Natria cards. Then at the end of March of the Lich King, in 4 months, they will be updated with March of the Lich King cards. That's how it goes. And these are average versions of meta decks from Castle Natria, and they were not doing too well at the start of March of the Lich King, but now that we got a bunch of nerfs, and no other balance changes have been done yet, surprisingly, these decks are actually quite competitive, and you can happily play with just your free decks and succeed. There are some big differences in dust values and big differences in cards that are going to stay in Standard format or not. Like Warlock and Warrior far behind others in dust value, Warlock is somewhat compensated by having newer cards, many Castle Natria cards, but if you're interested in long-term value, then you need to also consider that. And Mage, Warlock, Warrior, they're all legend capable out of the box as of today. So hopefully this will help you decide on which deck to pick, and it's a great time to be playing with all of these decks because you have actually 6 decks that are all somewhat playable, and that has not happened with the returning player decks before. Thank you for watching. Click like and subscribe if you enjoyed this, and a special thanks to all of my Patreon supporters, YouTube members and Twitch subscribers who make all of these videos possible.